She was 7 years old the first time she talked her mother down from a breakdown. She didn't have the words for what she was doing. She just knew that if she said the right things, used the right tone, made herself small enough and calm enough, the storm would pass. She got very good at reading the weather. By the time she was 12, she knew her mother's moods before her mother did. By the time she was 25, she had no idea who she was when nobody needed her. Her name is Sofia, and what happened to her has a name too. It's called emotional parentification, and it's one of the most invisible, most misunderstood, and most consequential things that can happen to a child. This video is for educational purposes only, and is not a replacement for professional mental health care. If what you hear today resonates deeply, please consider speaking with a licensed therapist. Let's talk about it. Part 1. What is emotional parentification? Most people understand parentification as a child taking on adult responsibilities, cooking, cleaning, raising siblings. That's called instrumental parentification, and it's damaging enough. But emotional parentification is different and subtler, and in many ways harder to see. Emotional parentification happens when a parent, consciously or not, turns to their child to meet emotional needs that should be met by other adults. The child becomes the parent's therapist, their emotional regulator, their safe place, their reason to keep going. The child learns to monitor, to manage, to absorb. They become fluent in a language no child should have to speak, the language of adult emotional distress. Psychologist Gregory Jerkovich, who has done foundational research on parentification, describes it as a role reversal, one that fundamentally disrupts the child's natural development because the child's own emotional needs become secondary. Always, not occasionally, always. The parent doesn't have to be cruel for this to happen. They don't have to be abusive. They can be loving, well-meaning, and still completely unaware that they are leaning on a child in ways that will take decades to untangle. That's what makes it invisible. The child doesn't feel like a victim. They feel needed. They feel important. They feel like the most essential person in the room. And that feeling of being someone's anchor becomes the blueprint for everything that follows. Part 2. The hyper-vigilant compass. Here's what happens inside a child who is raised this way. To manage a parent's volatility, their moods, their crises, their needs, the child must become extraordinarily attuned. They scan. They read micro-expressions. They calculate. They learn that the slightest shift in a parent's tone means something, that the way the door closes tells them everything they need to know before they even enter the room. This is not imagination. This is neurological adaptation. Neuroscientists studying early childhood stress have found that chronic exposure to emotional unpredictability in the home literally reshapes the developing brain, particularly the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, and the prefrontal cortex, which governs emotional regulation. The child's nervous system learns to operate in a permanent state of low-level alert. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. And while it was a survival tool in childhood, it kept Sofia safe, kept the peace, kept her mother regulated. It doesn't switch off when the child grows up. Sofia, at 31, still reads rooms the way she read her mother's face. She still knows before anyone says a word who is upset, who needs something, who is about to break. She anticipates needs before they are spoken. She smooths situations before they escalate. She is exhausted by a dinner party the way most people are exhausted by a crisis, because to her nervous system, there is no difference. This is the hypervigilant internal compass, built in childhood, carried into every relationship, every workplace, every room she enters for the rest of her life. And the cruelest part? People call it a gift. They call her intuitive, perceptive, emotionally intelligent. They don't see the cost. Part 3. Blurred's boundaries and what they build. When a child is positioned as a parent's emotional support, the natural boundary between parent and child dissolves. This boundary, The one that says a parent is there to regulate the child, not the other way around, is not just a social convention. It is developmentally critical. Children need to know that their parent is the emotional container, not the one who needs containing. When that boundary blurs, the child learns something fundamental and false, that relationships require them to be responsible for the other person's emotional state, that love means management, that closeness means always being available, always being steady, always putting yourself last. These are not beliefs Sofia chose, they were installed, and they show up in her adult relationships in patterns she spent years not understanding. She is drawn to people who need her, partners in chaos, friends in perpetual crisis, colleagues who lean on her constantly. She feels most comfortable, most valued, most herself when she is needed. The moment a relationship becomes equal, something in her gets restless. Something in her doesn't know how to exist without a role to play. She also cannot ask for help. Not really. She can perform the words. But when someone tries to take care of her, when the direction of care reverses, she becomes deeply uncomfortable, almost allergic to being held, because she was never taught how to receive, only how to give. Therapists who specialize in developmental trauma describe this as a core wound of parentified children. Not just the exhaustion of giving, but the profound disorientation of not knowing how to exist without it. Part 4: Adult Burnout and the Lifelong Caregiver. Sofia is 31. She has never had a relationship where she was not, in some form, the caregiver. She is also chronically exhausted. Not tired, exhausted. The kind of bone-deep fatigue that sleep does not fix. The kind that lives in the body like a second skeleton. This is the adult face of emotional parentification. Burnout that began before the child ever reached their own maturity. Research on parentified adults consistently shows elevated rates of anxiety, depression, and compassion fatigue. A landmark study published in the Journal of Family Issues found that adults who reported high levels of childhood parentification showed significantly higher rates of burnout, difficulty with self-compassion, and what researchers called compulsive caregiving, an inability to stop giving even when their own resources are depleted. Compulsive caregiving. Sofia recognized that phrase the moment her therapist said it. It wasn't that she chose to keep giving when she was empty. It was that stopping felt like ceasing to exist. Her identity was so fused with the role of caregiver that without it, she didn't know who she was. This is the deepest wound of emotional parentification. Not what it asks the child to do, but what it takes from them before they ever had a chance to find out. It takes the unanswered question, who am I when nobody needs me? Part 5: The Path Toward Unbecoming. Sofia's therapist used a word she had never heard before: unbecoming. Not becoming someone new. Unbecoming someone she was never supposed to be in the first place. Because healing from emotional parentification is not about learning to be less caring. It is about learning that your caring has a right to be selective, bounded, chosen. It is about separating the identity that was assigned to you, the family regulator, the emotional anchor, the one who holds it together, from who you actually are underneath all of that. The first step, researchers and therapists consistently say, is recognition. Not blame, recognition. Seeing clearly, perhaps for the first time, that what happened was not your job. You were a child. The emotional labor you performed was not maturity, it was survival. And surviving something is not the same as choosing it. The second step is grief. This is the one people don't expect. Grief for the childhood that was organized around someone else's needs. Grief for the version of yourself that never got to just be a kid. Grief that does not require you to hate your parent. Many parentified adults love their parents deeply, but that allows you to be honest about what was lost. The third step is learning to receive. This is often the hardest. It means tolerating the discomfort of being cared for. It means sitting with someone's concern without immediately deflecting it or redirecting it back to them. It means practicing, slowly and imperfectly, the belief that your needs are not a burden. Therapeutic approaches like internal family systems, somatic therapy, and attachment-based therapy have shown strong results with parentified adults, particularly in helping them reconnect with the younger parts of themselves that were never allowed to just need. Sofia is still in therapy. She still reads rooms. She still knows when someone is about to break before they do. But she has started to notice something new, a feeling she does not have a name for yet. The feeling of being in a room and not immediately scanning for who needs her. Of sitting in silence with another person and not feeling responsible for filling it. It is unfamiliar. Sometimes it feels wrong. But she is learning to stay in it, to trust that her presence does not have to be useful to be enough. If you grew up being the emotional anchor for an adult who should have anchored you, this video is your recognition. What you did was not maturity, it was survival, and you were allowed to put it down. Not all at once, and not without support. But you are allowed. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Psy Girl for more psychology that goes beneath the surface. And tell me in the comments, did you recognize yourself in Sofia's story? Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.